Welcome back to News in Focus. Now, the Global Sumud Flotilla says its fleet has sailed into the high-risk zone, which is moving closer to Gaza, where previous flotillas were attacked or stopped by Israeli forces. Now, 150 nautical miles was where many of the previous flotillas had been stopped. Now, the flotilla has rallied the world's attention once again to the suffering of the people of Gaza, and the flotilla joined land and sea in the mass mobilization of millions. Now, joining me is somebody who was, of course, part of the earlier days of this Global Sumud Flotilla. I'd like to welcome the co-founder of Scene TV, Yusuf Omar. Yusuf, assalamu alaikum. Good to have you on. Thank you so much for joining us.
Walaikum salam. Thanks so much for having me on the show. I'm glad to be here.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. Yusuf, you were there in the earlier days. I guess when you look at where the flotillas have reached right now, that momentum, that excitement, it has really culminated to such an important moment where we are right now in breaking that illegal Israeli siege.
It is a historical moment in the liberation struggle for Palestine. Most people don't realize that this is actually the 38th flotilla to head to Gaza to try and break the siege. Of course, flotillas have been heading to Gaza long before October 7th. 5 of them have actually been successful. And this particular flotilla is the largest of all time. It is now very, very close to Gaza, just a few hundred kilometers away. But obviously, it is in the most dangerous period of the mission overall.
Yeah, Yusuf, just listening to many within the flotilla and the drones, and I think everybody had anticipated these drones that were occurring. But how important is it that us as the public are kept aware of this? I mean, someone like you, Yusuf, who have years of experience in journalism, using that mobile phone just to let us know what is going on at this very moment. And as early as this morning, we were getting the updates with regards to that, and especially knowing the mannerisms and the way the Israeli army conducts itself.
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, the flotilla is effectively a sitting duck in the Mediterranean Sea, defenseless, without weapons, as a non-violent movement. The only form of defense they have is visibility. It is the political pressure mounted by millions of people around the world following this mission, which make it intolerable or difficult for Israel to enact any form of violence on the participants of the flotilla. And that's why the social media coverage is so important. That's why that visibility and awareness is so critical.
Yusuf, we had seen public pressure occurring. And then, of course, this culminated in the Spanish, the Greek, and just as early as yesterday, the Turkish Navy to join. From a legal standpoint, and we've had many legal analysts discussing this, how obligated were these countries to assist these citizens that are on these flotillas, given what they are dealing with? And of course, that is the Israeli army. And if we look at previous flotillas, drone attacks, detention of many on those on board of the vessels.
I think there's been a huge misunderstanding around some of these international countries that have deployed their Navy warships into the Mediterranean around the flotilla. Initially, there was some optimism or excitement that this might be an escort, that Italy, Spain, Turkey might be providing safe passage for the flotilla to arrive in Gaza carrying aid. And how wonderful that would have been. The reality is a lot of these naval ships have functioned as little more than at the very best emergency vessels, and at the very worst what appears to be a publicity campaign by those governments. They haven't materially been able to ensure the safety of the flotilla mission. They're certainly not at the spearhead of the flotilla ensuring that it actually arrives in Gaza. And obviously, if they did take that decision, if they were to oppose Israel's occupation and make this flotilla mission a success in terms of reaching Gaza, I think those countries would be under immense political and diplomatic pressure. And for that reason, they've played quite a passive role so far.
Yeah, and Italy, of course, being one of them. If we are to look at the reports, what had happened was the Italian Navy, some are saying they had been blocking the flotillas from going. Other reports had mentioned that they had obviously just abandoned the flotillas. But one would have expected, more of a political sort of assistance to these flotillas. I mean, how disappointing do you find that, Yusuf, that not much more is being done to try and assist these flotillas, given what sort of boats they are having at this very moment? I mean, for everyone out there, I think everyone knows these boats are not your MSC cruise ships. These are very difficult boats to sail on, and yet we have these citizens making the trip to deliver the aid to Gaza.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. But where would we expect any better? I mean, we're 2 years into a live stream genocide, and without exception, no country or government on earth has taken responsibility for delivering a flotilla of this nature, for being able to take food, medicine, water, baby formula to the besieged population of Gaza. This entire mission is nonsensical. It's insane that civilians have to go on a voyage of this nature. So to expect any of these countries to jump in now and have any meaningful impact when they've been silent at best and complicit at worst in this genocide is kind of hopeful thinking.
Yeah. Yusuf, one final question before we go to the break. We have seen previous flotillas obviously not breach the 150 nautical miles. And you've mentioned it earlier, the historic aspect of this. They're now in this high-risk zone. I'm sure you were there when many of the experts and legal analysts and legal minds were discussing what are the potential possibilities should the Israeli Navy go ahead and take many of the passengers on board the vessels as hostages. Talk to us about that, because this is also going to be quite an important moment, given that when we look at what Israel does, when we look at the history of how they conduct themselves in the flotillas, we can reach one conclusion. They could potentially either, number one, use drones to attack these flotillas, or number two, take all the passengers as hostages.
Yeah, so there's only really 2 or 3 final outcomes of this flotilla mission. Scenario 1 is that they successfully make it to Gaza, right? They have dozens and dozens of vessels, and it is going to be a logistical challenge for a navy like the Israeli occupation to be able to stop them all heading in the same direction at the same time. So that is the scenario that obviously the flotilla hope will be enacted, will be successful. The second scenario is interception. And this is rightfully, as you say, where the flotilla participants will be kidnapped effectively against their will. Their vessels will be taken control of by what is known as the S-13 division of the Israeli military, which is akin to the US Navy SEALs. Their boats will either be sunk or taken to a Israeli port, at which point the participants will basically have 2 options. One, they'll potentially have the option to sign a form that says they acknowledge illegally entering what they call Israel, or they won't sign that form. If they do sign it, it is believed they'll be released in a matter of days. If they don't sign it, it could take significantly longer. We've heard reports from Israeli ministers who have spoken about what they call wanting to put the flotilla's participants in terrorism prisons and the like. Israel are in an interesting position. On one side, they need to salvage the little public face that they have and appear to be kind and benevolent to these flotilla participants. On the other side, they can't possibly want to see more flotillas return in the future in even larger numbers. So they'll want to put up a display of force. They would want to show themselves as strong men, as make this a scary mission that other people wouldn't want to be a part of. So Israel are stuck between these 2 choices as well. And then, of course, the third scenario, if I mentioned the first one being that the flotilla reaches Gaza and the second one being interception, the third scenario is an attack. And we've seen across the years instances where Israel Israel have attacked. Even on this very mission, we've seen drones being used to attack the vessels.
Yeah, and of course those drone attacks happened in Tunisia. Well, after the break, we're going to be asking the question, how much has what we have seen over these last few weeks, and as we speak at this moment, garnered global support for those flotillas to break that illegal Israeli siege? My conversation with Yusuf Omar continues after the break. Welcome back to News in Focus. I'm still in conversation with co-founder of CNTV, Yusuf Omar. Yusuf, before we go to the support the Global Sumud Flotilla has garnered across the world, especially within the West, I want to touch on Israel because, and I'm going to use this word very lightly, public relations. Their PR, how they're trying to spin themselves at this very moment, has been a complete failure because, number one, we saw last week at the UN General Assembly at least a 90% walkout from many members of the UN General Assembly while Benjamin Netanyahu gave his speech. They've got an ICJ case against them. The United Nations, if we were to believe them as the highest ruling body in terms of saying in its report that there's a genocide happening in Gaza. For them to even attempt an attack on one of these flotillas, this will even deepen the worsening PR that they have right now. I just wanted to get your take on this because they're in a very precarious position at this moment.
Yeah, I mean, it's impossible to predict Israel's next move. If we've learned one thing over the last 2 years of this genocide and the 77 years of this occupation, they don't really care what the world thinks of them. They can kill Americans like Rachel Corrie without consequence. They can kill journalists. Over almost 300 of our media colleagues have been killed by the Israeli regime. At the same time, they do realize that they're becoming isolated. We've heard Benjamin Netanyahu talk about it even in the last 2 weeks, the Israeli isolation. And they've completely stuffed up their international reputation. Immediately after October 7th, if sympathy was a currency, they would have had more of that currency than any nation on earth. And the decisions that they made and the way that they showed their true colors, their genocidal instincts to the world, has really left them in a difficult space. I think with regards to this flotilla specifically, Israel are likely to take a similar strategy to what they did on the last flotilla mission. They're likely to potentially offer sandwiches and water and give an image to the international community that they are what they call the only democracy in the Middle East, that they are caring, etc. But it's unclear. I mean, even on the last flotilla missions, they beat up an African-American man, Chris Smalls, who was a union leader for Amazon. They are undeniably racist, cruel, vicious, and I think it's going to be hard for them to hide those tendencies.
Yusuf, let's talk about this global support for the flotilla. And of course, you were in Tunis. Everyone's been following the content that you have been giving to the globe. It's quite high, isn't it? It's quite jubilant. It's quite supportive in a nature that we probably haven't seen in previous flotillas. And that just shows that when you look at civil society, when you look at the citizens of the world, everyone wants to see this flotilla become a success. A recent poll in Italy has shown a overwhelming support for this flotilla, and that can only be a good thing.
It's incredible. And the reason why people are so fascinated about the flotilla is because on some level they have what you might call rubble fatigue. There's only so many dead babies you can watch. There's only so much bloodshed that you can witness. And of course, we will continue to digest the horrors of what's taking place in Gaza, and we'll be traumatized for years to come. But what the world is really looking for is a sense of a hope and optimism. And I think many of them have tried using their voices online. They've tried protesting on the streets. They've tried boycotting Coca-Cola and McDonald's and Starbucks and all these products. And they feel like the flotilla represents a really direct form of action, something very tangible, a group of everyday civilians delivering aid to a starving population. And for that reason, it's very hard for humans all over the world not to get behind this cause. But yet, we don't see the same from international governments. We haven't seen Western governments put their name in support of the Global Sumud Flotilla at scale. And I think that's really a tragedy and quite a shame, because that would have been such an effective way to keep this mission safe.
Yeah, and Yusuf, when you read the statements, especially from many of the Western nations, it's very muted, if not nothing at all. And I guess it needs governments, it needs politicians to make the hard decisions. And those hard decisions would, of course, mean sanctions against Israel. Whether this Global Sumud Flotilla is a failure or a success, and I hope it's a success, because my word, don't those Palestinian residents of Gaza need the aid, the medical items?
Whether they arrive in Gaza or not, whether the aid reaches the shores of the starving population or not, this mission is already an enormous success, because what it did was it inspired the entire world of what is possible when a grassroots movement with limited resources are able to do something that seems impossible. It also showed us that the world still has its humanity intact, that we still have global solidarity, that a kid in Chile or Brazil or Portugal cares about the population in Gaza, that we're not so isolated that we see ourselves as separate tribes and we don't come to each other's need when it matters most. So the Global Sumud Flotilla has already been a resounding success, whether they make it to Gaza or not.
Yeah, and Yusuf, I want to touch on the question I was going to ask previously with regards to sanctions. Are we at a point, and whether this flotilla reaches Gaza, and inshallah we hope that's going to be the case, can we start asking the questions from the politicians, from the governments, as to rather than if, when we could have sanctions against Israel? Because as we speak right now, attacks continue to occur in Gaza, and this impunity that Israel has enjoyed for over 70 years seems to not be stopping anytime soon.
The sanctions are the most important question. And the reality is, I live in Australia, or, our colleagues in the UK, all these countries are saying, we need a ceasefire now. The prime ministers will be the first to say it. We need to see a ceasefire. But these countries also provide the fire. Right here in Australia, in Sydney, where I am today, a country that is calling for Israel to have a ceasefire in Gaza. This is also the country where we produce the fuselages that help the fighter jets bomb Gaza. So the reality is, so many of these countries are addicted to the defense contracts that they have. They're addicted to profiting from this occupation. But sanctions 100% is where the direction of this conversation should move. And that's why we see this movement to remove Israel, not just in terms of trade, but also culturally isolate them in the same way that apartheid South Africa was culturally isolated. Don't allow them to participate in sporting events, cultural events, and otherwise. Truly make them a pariah state in exactly the same way that the West have effectively done to North Korea or Russia, for that matter.
One final question, Yusuf. You speak about the grassroots level that the flotillas have been, and you speak about the ages. I mean, in South Africa, you had a 22-year-old Nurain Saluji. I mean, at the age of 22, her focus should be, studying, looking for the next opportunity to further her career. But she's made the decision, because I know she's back home, but she made the decision to at least be there in the start of this flotilla. And you have individuals that are as old as 60 that are making the trip to this flotilla. That just speaks about the humanity. You've spoken about it, the humanity of our world. It's still there. And my word, that's such a good thing, because Gaza has awakened the humanity, if there were those that were sleeping on it, to say, we need to make sure that never again, we use this word never again, but surely now this movement right here speaks to that question of never again.
And I think the best part is, from all the flotilla participants that I've met and seen, the majority of them are not Muslim. The majority of them are not from Arab backgrounds. Often the Israelis themselves try to define this genocide as a Muslim thing, as a Arab thing, because it suits their narrative and it helps them get buy-in from Western Europeans that have a built-in Islamophobic predisposition, who have been brainwashed to only view Arab populations through the perspective of counter-terrorism and security. But the reality is this is not a religious conflict. This is ethnic cleansing. This is something we thought we left behind in apartheid South Africa, the segregation of races and superiority of races enshrined in law. This is something we thought we left behind in the segregation of the US. But clearly we haven't. We have this state that is Israel that continues to maintain the legal superiority of one ethnicity over another. And it's just beautiful to see the world coming together and saying they won't tolerate that.
Yusuf, absolute pleasure having you, and thank you so much for joining us. Wa alaikum salam.
Assalamu alaikum.
That's Yusuf Omar, co-founder and CEO of Scene TV. We're going to have an extended addition to News in Focus. Today, the P20, the Parliament 20, was launched at the National Assembly in Cape Town. I'm going to be speaking to Deputy Speaker Annelie Lotriet after the break. Do stay tuned.